And I thought of Kafka also because there's a story called Monkey Say, Monkey Do, and there's a beautiful Kafka story called Report to the Academy, which is in the voice of a monkey, and this is also in the voice of a monkey. And I think that there's something very plastic, very empathic about Edgar Keret. He writes stories in the voice of women, of monkeys, of older people, of children, and certainly of people, from in all walks of life, that aren't jobs that he himself has had. So this is there is this kind of generosity of moving into and out of different selves.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely, and of course, one of the things, again, speaking as a translator, one of the things that a translator always needs to do is to capture the voice of the narrator or the author, but also the voice of the different characters. And as he is empathic to different kinds of characters and speaks from different vantage points, the translator somehow has to reproduce that as well. And again, for me, since I've been living in Israel for umpteen years, figuring out how a child would typically speak if he were speaking English, but from the point of view of Edgar Keret, is a tricky challenge for me, because I'm constantly testing whether in fact this is how people still would speak. And he produces so many different voices that one has to be playing with voices a lot in a language which is my native tongue, but in which I do not live on a day-to-day basis.
Right. It's sort of like Moravia, Roman tales. He goes into all these different voices, and some of them are quite coarse and even obviously politically incorrect. He has characters making misogynistic remarks. Do you ever want to protect him and dilute it a little, because you know that that's not his position but his character's position?
Oh, we're getting into the issues of translators' intervention. This is a dangerous one. When he uses a misogynistic voice, you can be sure he's doing it deliberately, and probably kind of setting something up as a kind of straw man then to knock it down. So he protects himself well enough. There have been other writers who will remain unnamed where I've been very much tempted to tone down some of the politically inappropriate things, but I managed to resist.
Yeah, because he has this story where the character wants to get his girlfriend back. She's become a journalist, and he starts saying, all women journalists are whores. But of course he's completely still infatuated with her and he'll do anything. And so he gets involved with he acts the part of a hero in some incident, and then he says, I'll give a special, an exclusive, only if you get me this journalist to interview me. And so that's how he gets his girlfriend to talk to him again.
Yeah, but of course if he didn't use this horrible remark, the story would lose its point. So
right.
Far be it from me to tone it down.
So there really is a lot of street slang, of demotic, of language that's very now, and we're reading it in English. Does he in Hebrew does he play between a kind of very loose, demotic, and a kind of elegant, or is it mostly conversational?
It's very colloquial. He has a few stories. He has one story in particular which takes place in biblical times, which is very atypical. And there he is a master of biblical register, which was an entirely different kind, and not in this book, an entirely different kind of challenge. But 99% of the time it's colloquial. It's very much about dialogue. My previous translating experience was in translating plays, and plays are the most challenging, in a way, the most challenging medium, because it has to sound like authentic dialogue. So that in a way, Edgar Keret's stories are also little plays. There's a lot of dialogue in them. And demotic, colloquial, whatever we call it, you have to be 100% credible. And what happens in translation in general, but here in particular, I make the first draft, and then I keep toning it down, or rather bringing it down to the level of how people would really speak.
But you're living in Israel now, right?
Yeah.
So how do you stay so connected to American slang?
Well, it is a challenge. First of all, there's the business of not living in America, and although I read and I watch TV and all of that, that is something that I'm constantly worried about. And every now and then, in fact, with one of his works, Kneller's Happy Campers, which is a novella, I actually, after I translated it, it was the most difficult thing of his that I have ever translated, and it was also made later into a movie, Wrist Cutters, I think it was called. I sent it to 3 people in the States who don't know Hebrew, young people, nieces and nephews of mine, and I just said, just read this, and wherever it doesn't sound right, just tell me. And that was my way of making sure that it was consistent and credible, but I'm always worried about that. But basically, I mean, he's always presented as a young writer,
Yes.
which he is, but then again, young is a very relative term.
How old is he?
He's 42.
So he's getting long in the tooth for that young
Well,
writer.
yeah, well, some people are young writers forever. That's, just like some people are young singers forever.
Yes.
But if he's getting long in the tooth at 42 for being a young writer, since I'm about 20 years older than he is, and I'm supposed to be reproducing the same kind of young jargon or parlance or whatever, it becomes all of the more of a challenge.
Yeah.
But I love it.
Yeah. There's a lot of what, for want of a better term, might be called magic realism in his work. There's sometimes something that's very postmodernist in a kind of in the way he does conceptual stories. But certainly strange things happen. The story about the magician where he pulls out just a rabbit's head, and then he does a trick again, and up comes a dead baby. So it's kind of like magic realism where which is out of people's control in a way. Is this common in Israeli writing today, or is it something that is there some reason that he is drawn to this kind of imagery and turning of events?
Well, I can't answer for him as to why he's drawn to this kind of imagery. I mean, this is just him, but the truth is that there are quite a few authors who do it these days, but they are epigonic Etgar Kerets.
Right.
There are people like Orly Castel-Bloom who writes in a kind of post-structuralist, post-constructionist, post-modern vein who is comparable in a way to Keret, but many of the others are kind of Keret manqué. Mm-hmm. So he has kind of set a pattern, and he does it just perfectly. I mean, the story that you mentioned, the one in which he pulls this dead baby out of a hat, I mean, what could be more gruesome and macabre than that? And yet it works. It works because somehow he just knows how to strike the balance between the macabre and the humoristic.
Yeah, and also because he commands the voice so well. So no matter what happens, you still feel like a credible human being is talking to you.
Yeah, yeah, and it hangs together well.
Yeah.
Perhaps because they're so short, so they just...
Is that a special challenge to translate short pieces?
Well, by the time you're just figuring out what the voice and what the tone should be, and it's over in that sense, and then you're on to the next one, which is different. But other than that, actually I like translating short pieces, because you can kind of get a handle on them, finish one, and say, done, next one, as opposed to an 800-page novel where it just goes on and on. I suppose the challenge doesn't lie in the fact that they're short. The challenges lie, in the fact that they're very humorous, and capturing humor is always very tricky. And in the fact that there are so many cultural items, or culture-bound or culture-specific items, where one has to constantly consider whether they will go over well. For example, in this story about the rabbit,
yes,
or about the magician, they speak about the fact that the kids have become very blasé, and now some neighborhood, a kid in a nearby neighborhood, which is named in Hebrew, wants the magician to come and do the trick there as well.
Right.
The name would mean a lot to an Israeli. It would mean nothing in English. So if I remember correctly, I simply said in one of the ritzier neighborhoods,
yeah,
or something like that. But in fact, maybe I should leave the name in. If we were to ask, for example, Larry Venuti, a translation scholar who sometimes writes for Words Without Borders, I'm sure he would say that one should have left the name in, one should have left the cultural specificity.
right.
So this trade-off between the universal and the specific is more challenging.
What if you had done both? What if you had said the name and then put comma on one of the ritzier neighborhoods.
I might have done that, but then there are two reasons not to. Reason number one is that it gets very tedious. I mean, once it's okay, but you have about 10 such references, and it becomes a bit like you're spoon-feeding the reader. And reason number two is the whole point about his stories is that they're so staccato, and you start putting in all these appositions.
Yes.
It becomes tedious. And besides, what difference does it make what the name of the neighborhood? I mean, that could be the devil's advocate would say, who cares what the name of the neighborhood is?
Yeah.
It's not about that neighborhood. It's about the whole notion of blasé, ritzy kids wherever they live.